This is the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearing. There is only one case on the agenda. It is RPC 150600005. The property is located at 2416 16th Street North. Mr. Wayne Knox is the owner agent. Unfortunately, he is not in the call, so we will go ahead to Mr. Chicas for the county.
Good morning, board members. As you all know, I rely fairly heavily upon the summary sheet that you'll see, I believe, on page 3. We touched on this case a little bit last week. This one's a little bit unique in that in lieu of county-issued income expense questionnaires, we received either what's called a supplemental income and loss Schedule E form or a data used in federal tax return form. As you can see, we reconstructed those forms that we did receive. There was one county-issued I&E from the year 2020. That was when there was with the previous management company. I did express a fair amount of concern in using these alternate forms of income statements. Mr. Knox did acknowledge that that was, something he would work on for the future, that this is what he had for the properties that he appealed for this year. We did take them so we could make some sort of sense out of what's going on at the property and try to stabilize its history. You can see it's kind of hard to do because the numbers are all over the place. One thing we did find, and which caused the delay in the case, was when Mr. Knox asked for a worksheet for the county and received one, he noted that we had transposed the unit count for efficiencies in 2 bedrooms. And that is actually what kind of initiated the revision that we offered. As you can see in column G, that did indicate that our projection based on the former unit count was off by about $20,000, both at the gross potential and at the effective gross levels. One of the biggest problems we had without using the county issued I&Es was figuring out vacancy and concessions, etc. Essentially, they were starting with effective gross. So we knew that that was essentially baked in as far as whatever vacancy was being incurred at the property, but we didn't know exactly what percentage. It was kind of a moot point in that we're using stabilized 7%, but we did want to get down to a level that was somewhat in par with what's going on at the property, at least the last 2 years. When I'm looking at a 4-year history, if I don't see any trending whatsoever, I'll usually place more weight on the most recent 2 years, and that's what we did here. We did make a revision downwards from our January 1st projection, again, based primarily on the unit mix correction. We did note that the operating expenses went up quite a bit in 2021. I did ask Mr. Knox about that, and then he was related back to was essentially some what we would consider capital expenditures, capital improvement expenditures, like a lot of money on paint, work to the floorboards, etc. But rather than, again, be something that's done at turnover on units that have moved out, it was essentially done to the entire building, 17 units at once. It kind of made it, again, a moot point in that the increase in 2021, when stabilized over the years 19 and 20, saw a revision that was essentially right where we were as far as operating expenses. So they stayed essentially the same, right at about 30% of effective gross. But that did lower our NOI projection by about 18,000, which brought us to our proposed value, revised value, $3,603,800. I'm available for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from board members? Mr. Lawson?
Yes, Chris, I have a real quick question. Are owners obligated to use the county's questionnaire, or are they free to submit a different accounting?
I don't want to get the wording incorrect, but I believe that the Virginia Code states that if they do not issue a income statement, then they cannot argue the income approach come time for an appeal. So I'm not sure how the wording goes as far as if it's our income or statement or a income statement.
Yeah. The only reason I asked the question is a couple owners that only own 1 or 2 income producing properties claim that it's expensive to do it in the county's format. Whereas the larger property owners, it's no problem. They're used to it.
Well, it's essentially filling in information, but, so I don't see what the expense is to that. But Mr. Chicas, has this owner ever provided any information?
Yeesh. I'd have to go some years back, ma'am. Again, as I understand the story, is even in the year that it was provided by the management company.
Right.
So as I understand,
Because it had to be provided to do the tax return.
That's correct. The tax return was actually, that's where it gets interesting. The tax returns were actually filled out by Mr. Knox himself. So we had to actually modify those to get rid of his social security number and things like that.
Right.
So I assume that those were literal from his tax return, his 1040s. But I'd have to go back to find out when they stopped. I know it would have been prior to 2018 because we didn't have any to fill in with our stabilized performance.
Okay, well, I wish he was here because I have questions for him, but Mr. Metzkin.
Me too. So I'll refer my questions only to the department. A couple of small questions. First one is, you mentioned that there's some upgrades in the place. The effective age will probably be changed to a more modern time than 1950. Are you planning on doing that this year, going over on site?
Yeah, I'd love to tell you that and make that an accurate assertion. The biggest problem we have is still just the manpower and number of properties to touch. I think as Ms. Kelly has told you, I'm already at some 60 reviews in for the year, and I still have 93 to go. So it's really just a matter of how much time we can allot for that. But that is the goal, is to touch each property and make sure that we have an accurate lead rate. Yes, sir.
All right, sounds good. Thanks. Next question. The apartment income, the rents in both columns F and G, where did those numbers come from? Especially F, because it's just so much lower than anything we've seen before.
Sure.
And let me, excuse me, Chris, and let me just add, on page 4 of 20 is a third number. Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, I have a separate question. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Apologize.
Sure, not a problem, sir. So column F will come directly from a reconstruction of what's called data used in federal tax return. And that was essentially one of the forms we received in lieu of the I&E. So that came from Mr. Knox. And again, I believe that came from his 1040.
So
column G,
yeah.
column G would be our revision based on that new information.
Well, I guess that's my question. It goes up 10% or so. How did you get from F to G? What happened? What other data did you get?
So again, we looked at B, C, D, and F, which is going to be years 19, 20, 21. We did note that, again, unfortunately, Mr. Knox's documents don't provide a gross potential, only an effective gross. So we don't have the ability to sort of discern concessions or vacancy. So we're looking at an average of those effective gross. And again, as I noted, in years without any sort of trending or true stabilization on its own, I'll look to put more weight on the previous 2 years, or the most recent 2 years, which is what we did with years 2021, okay. And saw that with some of the properties, they were having a downturn in income, either as they tightened up occupancy and lowered their rents, or just lost rental income.
And lastly, directly on that, what you just said, that process yielded page 4 of 60, the 22 apartment revisions sheet, right?
That's correct.
That's the product of your conclusions. Thank you.
Sure.
Right, but just to follow up on that, Mr. Chica, so you changed the counts of the units, but I mean, in some respects, how does this change from a standpoint of any other kind of income or whatnot associated with it? I mean, I just think it's very difficult to do this while we're looking at equality and uniformity in assessment.
As far as why does it make less money with fewer 2 bedrooms? And
yeah.
Well, 2 bedrooms are typically going to command more money. So its gross potential would drop based on just that simple fact of reducing it from 3 2 bedrooms to 1.
Right, but I thought you weren't using gross potential. You were using
Well,
what
we
they
still are
report.
going to use gross potential because that's how we'll start with using a guideline of 7% for vacancy and concessions. But what I'm doing is I'm using that the numbers that are given to me don't have a gross potential. So I'm looking at the
Right.
effective gross of essentially 327 and then 306. So it's 3 years going down. And what we do see is that without knowing what the vacancy and concession is, it makes most sense to use a revision of the effective gross rather than a projected gross potential, which we really have no inkling of whatsoever.
Right.
But we know what the effective gross is reported as.
All right, other questions? No. All right, Mr. Chikas, if you take a minute to tell us anything else.
Absolutely. So again, based on limited knowledge we do have, based on the lack of gross potential, but seeing 3 years in a row of effective gross income drop, we did note that the unit count mix projected a lower gross potential than what we had projected January 1st. Based on that new information, we do believe that the revised value of 3,603,800 should be confirmed. Thank you. All
right, thank you. All right, it's just among the board members. I mean, I'll just start by saying one thing. You know, I don't feel comfortable just arbitrarily saying, okay, well, we've got some of the information. I feel like the appellant, it's the burden of proof is on the appellant. The appellant did not provide the information to, you know, sign across the bottom of 1040s. That doesn't necessarily tell me that those are the ones that he filed with the IRS, if those are legitimate. You know, I don't know, you need a 4506 to see if that was actually the return. And plus, it's just not uniform with everybody else. So I feel like this is rewarding bad behavior. This guy, you know, I went on the website, he's got 40 years in property management, 30 years in construction. He's got an engineering degree, an MBA in finance. He knows how to do this. I mean, mass appraisal is done on providing the information, and he's asking for a reduction, and he's not playing by the rules. So from a standpoint of equalization, I mean, I think it's just opening the door to just allowing anybody to provide whatever information and go, oh, you have the room count wrong, or you have the apartment mix wrong, so it should be decreased. He's not provided the information, so I, you know, may be alone in this, but I do not have any inkling to reduce it. I think the original assessment should stand, and he should provide the information. But what's everybody else think?
But Mary, I'm sorry, but wasn't the value already revised and lowered?
No, this is voting. This is to vote to revise it.
Okay.
Correct, Mr. Chikas?
There's
Yeah,
no
so-
covenant here, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what had happened was, to refresh everyone's memories, this came about the Friday before the last Tuesday's hearing. It's basically, he asked to see a worksheet. At that point, he noted this was incorrect, and then we offered a revision before the board hearing.
Right, so it's up to us to accept it or not accept it. Mr. Matzkin.
Directly related to your points, Mary, Mr. Chikas, who has been doing this a while and knows a lot of stuff, suggests that state statute says that people abrogate their rights to appeal if they don't provide the data in a consistent fashion. One, if that's true, it just adds fuel to your fire, Mary. B, I'd like to request the department that they make sure that that's true through their legal interpretation, however they do these things, scanning of the statutes. I mean, I don't mean in the next minute. I mean, from now on, because I prefer to follow along with state statute and not entertain appeals that are not by law appropriate. So I'd like to get real definitive input on that.
Okay, other folks? Mr. Lawson.
Yes, I guess I look at this a little differently. I kind of feel like, you know, the county's expert and the property owner have worked together and come up with a compromise position. And if we don't uphold it, the property owner could just file an appeal to court, and then the county would acquiesce in the value that the property owner is seeking. I feel we should ratify the agreement between the two parties. My understanding, I'm by no means an expert in this, but my understanding is you have to provide the information, but not necessarily in the form that the county has. And I know why the county wants this form to be used because it gives us good, valuable information. But I don't know that a property owner necessarily must use the county's form if they supply the information in another way. So my own position is I think we should not substitute our judgment for that of the parties.
Well, I guess I would agree with you if Mr. Chikas was 100% firm in where his numbers came from, but he's trying to extrapolate off of a tax return that, uses, capital expenses, under expenses. You can write off different things on a 1040 that you don't do under an I&E. It's got depreciation in there. It's got all kinds of other things in there that you don't have necessarily on the other forms. And like I said, this is not, an owner that's not aware of the difference between those two documents. Mr. Yates.
Mary, I agree with you that I don't really want to reward him for his bad acts of not providing the information properly. But at the same time, I'm looking at it that the only adjustment is really with that number of units, which is somewhat black and white. The county's agreeing that those are what the number of units really should be. So that's the correction that they made that came up with this other number. Now, if he provided the proper information, everything else could be very different. But right now, all we're doing is adjusting that one element that the county has agreed that it may be bad information across the board or semi-bad. But right now, that's the one element that they've come to an agreement on that we would be adjusting the number based on, is just the unit count. I mean, I'd rather see him provide everything too.
Right. No, and, I don't know. I mean, but he's trying to stabilize it using the 7%, which we don't know whether that's accurate or not accurate. And,
I agree.
I guess I just find that 9 times out of 10, when somebody doesn't give you the information, it's because it's got information that they don't want you to know. So, Mr. Metzgen.
I would add, excuse me, I would add that the appellant's done himself no favors, aside from not being here, but not really providing any definitive information, defending or explaining anything. Here are my 1040s and my, schedules, whatever, department enjoy. I mean, the burden of proof's on the appellant. And although I'm very sympathetic to what Barnes just said, these are the parties, they're grown-ups and they know the score. Excuse me. It came to us, and I don't trust any of these numbers, and therefore the process that the department took initially to come up with a higher original value isn't any less valid than anything else. And I don't see how we cannot default to that, especially from an appellant who may be out of statutory compliance. I generally defer to the parties. I mean, they but not in this case.
And Ken, this is Barnes again. If this were a rookie, then I would agree with you. But I mean, Chris, how long have you been doing this?
14 years in the department, about 5 years on the commercial team.
Yeah, so I'm going to defer to Chris's expertise in this.
Okay, other folks?
It's reasonable.
Mr. Penaranda?
Yeah, this is, I mean, my first reaction was like with any other case, we look at the NOIs, we look at the history of the property, and of course this NOI has been going down, and even the original assessment, the NOI is close to the level of 2018. So I thought that assessment was, pretty much in line. It was a good one. It was a low one, and lowering it more, I thought, this is really putting a big icing on the cake. But I'm, I was tending to go with the revised assessment because I thought it was already lowered. But yeah, I agree with you, and this is not the first time. We've seen many cases that they provide, whatever information is just convenient to them. But once, this is one point that they discovered, the number of units was incorrect, they corrected. But overall, looking at all the numbers, yeah, they should provide in the way that, you know, they're really supposed to. And this is not the first time we've seen this. So yeah, I'm okay with that. We're just going with the original, I guess.
All right, Mr. Hoffman, anything?
No, I'm with Barnes. I'd go with the county's revision.
I'm with the revision, just because all we're dealing, everything else we know's off. There could be off. But the one item that we know that's changed between the two is the unit count. And that's all it comes down to. And the county used that unit count.
Mr. Metzgen.
Mark, I think maybe you made an incredibly salient point in that, sure, these numbers are off for this year, but they've always been off for the same reason. And if we accepted them before, and Mr. Cheek is struggling to make sense of this, maybe we should accept his output now, again, for the same reasons. He just trying to do the best he can with what he has. And so his extrapolations from prior years are estimates of estimates. Well, I guess I'm flipping because what you said really affected me. That's, yeah, now I'm not, I guess I'm flipping. I'm flipping.
Well,
So I'm confused. So Mr. Metzgen, where are you?
I'm now on the side of accepting the revision between the parties. If we see this next year and it's the same gobbledygook, I'd probably be a lot less thrilled. But again, these are just guesstimates of estimates or estimates of guesstimates. And the department worked with these same kind of numbers before, came up with something, nobody said anything. He got his tax bill, presumably he paid it. This year, for some reason, he decided it was an outrage and appealed. But nothing really has changed. And of course, Mark's right. The operating income, whatever it's based on, should be less because there's less valuable unit mix in there than the department had thought all this time, based on no fault of its own. So I was, I guess, 5149 going with the original. Now I'm 4951 going with the revision because primarily, again, from Mark's perspective.
Yeah, I guess, you know, I don't know. I look at this and I think, so we changed the, you know, the count, but I mean, the gross potential that they've tried to extrapolate is in line with what was reported. So whether, you know, there's 10 units or 20 units, what difference is, you know what I mean? I just think it's just not enough information, but I guess everybody's got their opinion. So, you know, I don't know. Mr. Yates, you're about to say something.
I'll make a motion that we accept the county's agreement or revision based on the unit count change. And that's the 3063,800.
Okay.
No, it's 3,603.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah,
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so it is 4-2, and that's without Mr. Penaranda and myself. The county's revised assessment of $3,603,800 is confirmed. Since Mr. Knox likes to quote the code, I'm going to ask the county attorney under 58.1-3386 to compel him to provide the income and expense statements moving forward or be subject to a class 4 misdemeanor for not doing so. So that completes the agenda for today. Does anybody have any other business? No? Okay, there is no hearing tomorrow on June 15th, nor on Tuesday, the 21st. The next hearing will adjourn now at 9:26 and re-adjourn on next Wednesday, June 22nd at 9 a.m. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, board members.